If you've had any cryptid encounters that you'd like me to share on here, email me at jttosstories@gmail.com. Story 1. So, I've always been a believer in the supernatural, mostly open-minded to new ideas, and I read a lot of posts on this stuff, and others like it, and whenever I mention I've seen the Jersey Devil, someone wants to know what happened. I mean, I would too. It's just a long story, so I figured someday I'd tell it. Here it is. So, I guess a tiny bit of background. I'm a New Jersey native born and raised, and I was about 12 or 13 when my entire family went camping in the Pine Barrens, which is where it was said to be born. Ever since I was little, I've been into occult stuff, so I already knew about the Jersey Devil, and I was one of the oldest cousins, so I can't tell you how many times we searched for the cabin it was born in. Also, I should mention, we used to go camping there all the time. Less and less as we got older, but point is, we did this often. So I remember it being the first night. We, on average, would spend a week, and I remember we watched the movie Coraline that just came out, and we loved it. I'm mentioning this because I had a pretty fun night before I encountered it, so it wasn't a nightmare-induced hallucination or anything. So, another fact is that my family didn't like to actually camp. We had RVs. So, it's just my dad and I in our camper, and it had one bed in the back, and I slept on the couch that pulled out to be another bed. My dad closed all the blinds we had, and I was next to the biggest window in the camper. Little me is asleep and happy, and then boom, I wake up from thunder and lightning. I remember not liking how loud it was and not being able to go back to sleep. So I'm just laying there, listening to the storm, which must have been right above us, because the lightning was frequent. Okay, so now this is where I think I'm hearing something. Footsteps. I thought I did, and I was like, just an animal. But they started off quiet, and of course got louder and louder, and closer. I'm still really not thinking anything yet. I mean, I was still freaked out, but again, I was certain it was just the storm. In a matter of seconds, I was like, oh no, not the storm. Mind you, I'm facing the window up against the wall, so I could look up the blinds to see a tiny bit outside. This is important info, because that's when this thing came up to the window. So I'm freaking out, barely breathing, because in my head I'm like, what on earth just stomped up to our RV? Again, this all happened very fast, and lightning strikes. Boom. It looks like a horse is looking into the RV. Honestly, typing this, I can still hear it breathing on the glass. I only saw a little of the bottom of its chin, I guess. This might have been my imagination, but I'm pretty sure I saw what looked like fangs. And once that lightning struck again, I spun around so fast I wasn't facing the window anymore. I regretted moving at all, and at this point, I'm holding my breath, begging that whatever is out there just didn't see me now. So lightning strikes again, and I see its shadow, almost as if lightning was striking directly behind it. It looked like a horse. Definitely had the same size head as a horse, but the top half seemed to resemble a goat. It looked like it had spiral horns, or at least something that made the top of its head look weird, and something went off in my brain like, oh no. Also, please remember, I was only seeing what I could from when lightning was striking. It started to make its way toward the front of the RV, and like I said, all our blinds are shut. So as soon as I heard those loud footsteps making their way towards the front, I basically jumped from my bed into my dad's. I laid down behind him and didn't want to make too much movement, but I was shaking him and trying to get him up. Said something like, just go back to bed. He knew I wasn't a fan of storms, so that was probably his first, still half asleep thought. Just to paint a clearer picture, I'm up against the wall behind my dad. There's a window in front of him and one at the top of our heads. The footsteps come around again, and since I'm behind my big dad when the lightning struck, I could only see the weird top part of its head. The ears and the horns, I guess. Anyway, it was there, looking in. Like I said, I can still hear that heavy breathing because it was terrifying. The most confusing thing is that when I left and it headed towards my aunt's campgrounds, so did the storm. In the beginning, when I initially woke up from the storm, I guess it must have been close. I guess, in my theory, maybe since this creature was so loud with its hooves and breathing, maybe that's what it does. It creates a storm so that it can be stealthy. I've dealt with people who have led survival camps and have spent years in the Pine Barrens with no signs whatsoever. That's what's so intriguing, in my opinion. I mean, it is an entity. It could probably make a storm if it wanted to. So as it left, the storm calmed down, and I finally got back to sleep. In the morning, of course, my dad and aunt didn't believe me, and going outside that morning, the ground was semi-wet, but I remember there being no footprints. Another quick fact that I forgot to mention is that we were in an RV. I mean, if this was just some nasty horse walking around, it would have had to have been at least 8 feet tall to look in the window like that, unless it was standing on its back legs. That was my big argument to my aunt and dad on why there was no way it was a horse. I live in Jersey City now, but I'll never forget that camping trip. It happened so fast, but it takes forever to tell. I've always wanted to share my story here, so if you have any questions, please feel free to ask. Story 2. This happened to my dad's family when he was a kid. I'm not too sure how old he was, or the exact date this happened, but what I know is that it was a night in the fall, sometime in the early 80s. My dad and his parents were on their way to Gallup, New Mexico to see a movie. They are located in Zuni, New Mexico, and the drive to Gallup is 32 miles heading north. My grandpa was a forest ranger at the time, and he worked in the Zuni Mountains. He was using his ranger truck to get to town. Now, I will tell this instance mainly from my dad's perspective. He's the only person that's ever explained this to me. My grandma is eerily bothered so much, she doesn't like talking about it. My grandpa is dissociative with the family, so never really had the chance to ask. Anyway, they're about halfway to town. It's dark out. Large ponderosa trees cover both sides of the road. In the midst of driving, my grandpa stomped on his brakes. My grandma sitting passenger and my dad in the back seat. At this moment, my dad is confused. He's facing towards the back window, passenger side. He sees my grandpa quickly reach over the back seat to grab his rifle off of a gun rack. He heard him open his door and fire one shot. My grandpa hit it, and it screamed. My dad now looks over the seat to see it running to the right of the road, which would be east, and it takes one large step over a cattle guard and disappears into the woods. They drove away and proceeded to watch the movie without discussing anything about what happened. Now, my dad says that, according to Grandma and Grandpa, the Bigfoot was hairy, but not like you'd expect. Its hair was fringed and balding. They said it had pale blue skin and looked fatigued. When my grandpa shot it, it dropped its jaw for a couple of seconds. Its jaw dropping looked grotesque. Like, it couldn't have possibly made its mouth any wider. Then came the scream. The scream is the eeriest part. They all said they'll never forget it. It was loud, gross, and had meaning. After screaming, it lunged to its left, east, took a step over the cattle guard, and ran into the forest. The jaw dropping is what makes my grandma not want to talk about it. She says it's the scariest, ugliest thing she's ever witnessed. Now, after they got home, it started haunting and following my grandpa. That night, my grandpa got no sleep. My grandma didn't either, and that's how she knows. She pretended to be asleep, but the both of them heard things around their house that night. Movement, noise against the walls, and an overwhelming feeling like something is out there in the dark. My grandpa continued his work as a ranger, but soon quit due to constant run-ins with this thing. When he was out of the forest, or in there, he knew it was watching. He could smell it, hear screams, hear knockings. He made disturbances in the road, seemingly just for him. It would toss branches in the road, to and from destinations like it knew his schedule or where he had to be. It scared my grandpa so much that he hasn't gone back since, and since then it hasn't bothered him. All while this was happening, my grandpa experienced one wild ride as a ranger. I believe he's seen UFOs, strange murders, and very odd occurrences all in that one forest, i.e., people acting too jolly, rituals, lost people. He's written down all of this stuff that's happened. It's in a binder at his house, but I really want to read it. My dad has read it and says it's completely nuts, but unfortunately my gramps now has cancer and is a shut-in from it. Hopefully I get to see him soon, or I get my hands on that book. Zuni is truly a place of mysteries. Some really weird stuff goes down here all the time.